Hello, football family. Welcome into Huddle It Up Films. We're here to roster crunch this thing, hash through the defensive side of the roster. I have Gabe and Jordan back with me. Encourage you guys to watch the offensive show if you haven't already. From the Situation Room, we talked about those guys before. But what is the website? Is it Film Study Baltimore or Film Study Ravens? Because I hear both.
Film Study Baltimore.
I just wanted to test you on that. I knew that because I typed it into
Jordan
the
gets it
thing.
wrong.
Jordan says Film Study Ravens. He does. But yeah, catch these guys at the Situation Room, Film Study Baltimore. Their links are below. You're going to get into it, and you're going to love these guys. We gave a kind of a longer introduction last time, so this time we'll jump right into it. We're going over the defense, position group by position group, and just giving our thoughts as we head into this just most important third preseason game. Said on the last show, I don't expect the starters to play much in this game. I just don't think it would be wise. I hope Coach Harbaugh agrees with me on that. What more do you really need to see from Calais Campbell, Derek Wolfe, Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, Deshaun Elliott, Chuck Clark, even Patrick Queen at this point? Like we can't afford to lose him or Malik. It'd be really interesting to see because there's a lack of bodies at the inside linebacker position. But how we play this third preseason game is going to be key. And I want to start with the big guys up front. And the two guys I want to focus on, and we can talk about the starters as we go through this, but the two main guys that have just splashed on the scene to me is number one, Broderick Washington, who has taken a huge step. He had an offseason incident that seemed pretty serious when you consider, if you look it up, you can do it yourself. I don't talk about players' business here, but it could have been a situation where he would have been off the roster, and I would have been, okay, well, something's going on that I don't know about. He comes out, his pad level looks great, still has the grown man strength. And then Aaron Crawford, just a surprising performance, stout guy, a guy that you still have team control of. And he's battling with Justin Ellis, who, of course, is a veteran steady player, but he's only on a 1 year deal. So obviously, if they're a tie, you want to go with the younger guy in the team control. So, Jordan, we'll kick it off with you. What sticks out to you about this offensive line in general? And then Gabe, when he finishes up, just go ahead and transition off of him like you guys always do.
Yeah, I mean, the Ravens love to rotate these guys, and they've got four guys that they can rotate up at the top, and I think that's what's going to be critical. I mean, the between Williams, Campbell, Wolf, and Metabike, that's a great four-man rotation. When you're in nickel, you only need two defensive linemen that are going to be out there on the field. So you've got four of them that you can rotate as needed. Williams kind of in the earlier downs. Everybody else kind of being a little bit more focal point of the later downs. So you need guys like Ellis, Crawford, or Washington to really be soaking up maybe 15 to 16 snaps each in critical situations, right? Like taking some of those goal line snaps when they need that fourth or fifth defensive lineman out there that's going to body up. And I really like what we've seen from Washington this preseason, and it's not just, the pad level's been great, but he's also just been around the ball. It seems like he's made that jump in terms of being able to understand what's happening in front of him and at least reacting to it from that perspective. I think his roster spot is definitively safe, but it feels like the defensive line is a little tight because of the way that I think they've utilized some of these guys. Metabike played well into the third quarter of the preseason 2 game, which I was not thrilled about.
Me neither.
But I don't think they have the bodies. And so, if they're going to rest the three big starting guys, then they need the bodies, otherwise they've already cut down to 80. So it's going to be tight across the board. It'll be interesting to see kind of what they want to do and how they approach that. But I agree with you. I think Ellis is going to keep his spot. I think Crawford is a guy that ultimately can make his way to the practice squad. And if they want to replace Ellis or Ellis gets hurt or somebody else gets hurt, he's the next man up. But I'm not worried about him getting claimed, and it seems to be with all the roster crunches and everywhere else, all the other spots, he seems predestined at this point to be on the practice squad.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with Jordan. Although if it was me, I would take Crawford, but I think that the biggest issue would be kind of that veteran locker room presence, and I think a lot of people really respect Justin Ellis in that locker room, and I think that's not something you want to shake up if you can avoid it. And it's unfortunate for Crawford because I think he played really well in that preseason Week 1 game. He was all over the field. He was applying pressure. He was very stout in run defense. And, he's a little bit undersized for your nose tackle type, but he reminds me a lot of Michael Pierce. He uses his leverage really well. He uses his arms really well. He's just someone who has, a quicker step than you might expect out of someone his size as well. So I think that he has a future in the NFL, whether it's on the Ravens roster or if it's on their practice squad, that might be an ideal situation. But I might disagree a little bit with Jordan. I think he's someone who might get snatched up. I think there's a lot of teams who could use someone like him on their 53-man roster. And it's just, one of the themes of this side of the ball is that the Ravens have incredible depth. I think, defensive line was a position that I was a little concerned about heading into this season because it's a lot of older kind of guys. The starters are all over 30. I think Ellis might be 29. He's pushing 30. And then you have really just one guy who I was confident in Justin Madubuike. But now that Broderick Washington has kind of shown that he really fits into this group as well, you have a little bit more youth, and I think that helps you when you're talking about the future years. And he's someone I think can contribute in this season as well as a rotational defensive lineman. I'm not sure how many times he's going to be on like the active game day roster. The Ravens tend to keep 4 or 5 active defensive linemen. Generally, that 6th lineman is not going to be activated. And Washington might be the odd man out. It might be Ellis or that nose tackle as well. But it probably depends on the type of team you're playing in some instances. But I do think, he's someone who you at least like to have as someone who's some injury insurance at the very least.
Yeah, I think Crawford's undersizedness is going to be the thing that holds him back. I mean, he's 30, 40 pounds lighter than Michael Pierce. I think you can see similarities in their game, but the Ravens want. My hunch is that the Ravens want a true backup to Brandon Williams out of that last spot. I think it will be Ellis for that reason, and I think he will be inactive on game days because of that.
Yeah, good point. I mean, Ellis, it seems like the kind of guy where, okay, if we need 10, 15 snaps, let's put Jelly in. We know what he could do. He's a bigger guy. And Crawford, man, though, I kind of lean with Gabe that there may be a chance that he gets claimed because I think that he would fit in any scheme with his quickness. I could see him being a one-gap penetrator and holding up, and just doing his thing. And then also with Crawford, I think it's important for us to point out to anybody watching that he did play last year at Pittsburgh and played a heck of a game too. So it's not one of these just preseason camp heroes that you weigh it and throw it out. They're on every team every year. Crawford has some decent NFL tape on tape, but Washington, I just want to echo. I believe it was Gabe's point that my concern level for this group went from one of the most concerned on the team because of the depth to not concerned because some of these guys are going to get banged up. Wolf, his injury history kind of speaks for itself. He was an Iron Man for us last year. A lot of bodies in the piles, beat up fingers. They might need a day off, a week off. I'm better say. You got a 17-game season. So Broderick Washington being able to play that 5 tech, which honestly, guys, this is a good one for your show. The 5 tech is overused. It's really not a 5 tech anymore. It's more of a 4 or a 4I. You don't see these guys lined up outside the tackle. They're lined up right on the tackle or inside. But people like to call it a 5 tech. I'm guilty of it. That's where Washington fits, though. Right over that left guard, in between that left guard and the left tackle. Does a really good job. So a lot of positive things. Of course, everybody wants to talk about Madubuike. We all expect big things from him. I don't think we need to really talk about him. The one guy I want to touch on specifically is Calais Campbell because this won't be the last time you hear me say this. I think people forget how dominant this man was before he got hurt. Not just the 3-sack game in Philly, but disruptive from down to down, play to play, until he injured his calf. And then when he came back, he had a bout with COVID, pretty serious bout from what he said. So he was battling COVID and the calf injury at the end of the year. But this man, even in his 14th season, something like that, 13th, 14th season, is still an absolute monster. So a lot of great things to expect from this group. And it thing that kind of is ironic in a kind of a good or bad way is on the outside, it's a lot less known. You have 2 rookies who look pretty good. I mean, Dalen Hayes, man, wow. He's really surprised me. Adafio Way looks like he's going to play and contribute as he gets his technique down. And then you got veterans like Pernell McPhee, Jalen Ferguson. Does he make the roster? Justin Houston, I question how much he has left in the tank, but he's definitely going to contribute in some way. And, of course, Tyus Bowser with his new deal. I think he'll be doing the Tyus Bowser things, probably the most predictable guy of the group. Gabe, we'll start with you on this. Hey, I'm going to put you on the spot. Give me who's going to lead the team in sacks, how many? How do you see this breaking out? Because we rely on other positions for our sacks. Sacks, pressures, what's the rotation look like, Gabe?
So I'm going to jump back to Calais Campbell real quick because I think he
Sure.
might lead the team in sacks this year. And if it's not him, it might be Justin Madubuike. I think just the way that the Ravens use their players, their outside linebackers, they use them dropping the coverage a lot. So and they rotate their outside linebackers too. So I'm not sure if that's a position that's going to actually lead the team in sacks. So I like Campbell's productivity. He's been someone who's been a double-digit sack guy in the past. I think Madubuike has that upside in the interior pass rush. So it might be one of those who actually leads a team. And I'm not sure if it's going to be a double-digit, but 8 to 9 sacks for one of them, it would not surprise me. And I think combined they might notch 15 sacks this year. But jumping back to the outside linebacker position, I think this is a really interesting group of players. And it's strange how one player kind of just puts it over the edge, because before Justin Houston joined the unit, I think there was some concern. There was a little bit too much youth. You had that one guy who you could count on, and Pernell McPhee, but he's going to be on a pitch count. He's probably not someone you want to playing more than 400 to 500 snaps at most. I think now it can be even less than that, and he can be more of a situational pass rusher for you. I think that's also the role that Houston's going to play. They're more of the traditional kind of pass rushers. But what I love about these young outside linebackers is their versatility. I love how that they're super athletic. Even Hayes is athletic for someone of his size. I think that Owe, he's one of the most athletic outside linebackers we've seen in the NFL, and Bowser really isn't that far behind him in terms of what they can do, dropping into coverage, blitzing, moving around. Looking at pressuring from different gaps, different alignments. And that just fits right into Wink's wheelhouse and how he loves to kind of, show false pressure, drop guys into coverage, blitz guys from different angles. You talked about the different guys getting sacks. I think it's a good chance we see, defensive backs with 3, 4, 5 sacks this year, like we've seen in the past. It might be Deshaun Elliott, coming through, getting a couple of sacks in a game or something. I think, that's what I love about this defense. It's just so much fun to watch just the moving pieces, how they all kind of move in unison at times. It's really fun to watch if you break it down.
Yeah, and I think we need to just pause and just talk about one guy, take a turn on Jalen Ferguson, because roster crunch is the name of the game on this side of the ball. I mean, I wish I had 27 spots, 28 spots for this side of the ball. We're only going to have 26 at the most. You have to keep 24 on offense. Jalen Ferguson, not a guy that I had tremendously high expectations for this year. I kind of thought he was stuck in he is what he is. And then he comes back and his body looks transformed. He looks like he's playing with a lot more confidence. Everybody's career path is different. Sometimes it takes a wake up call, or it could just be a conversation about your nutrition, or maybe he realized his spot was in jeopardy, or maybe it took him a little bit of time coming out of a smaller school. So what are your thoughts on Jalen Ferguson? Is this a guy we have to keep? Are you willing to cut a younger safety or a younger player to get 2 more years of Jalen Ferguson? Does he have a place in the rotation? And then also, something else I want to throw out there while we're on Jalen Ferguson is, do any of these guys have the flexibility to come inside and play between the tackles other than Pernell McPhee?
Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, I don't think you can cut Jalen Ferguson quite at this point. I think that with the draft capital that was invested in him and what we've seen up to this point, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to cut him. I'll insert here, and when you were talking about Crawford and the defensive line and kind of at risk of him getting claimed, between this podcast or between this video and the offensive video, we've already talked about like probably 7 different guys that we think are going to get claimed, right? That doesn't just for context, that doesn't happen, right?
Right.
Like if you go back and look at 2019, which was a year that Zach Seiler made it to the practice squad, like a guy that we would have been worried about. Carl Davis was the only guy that got cut that ended up on another team. So generally speaking, we might lose 1 or 2 of some of these guys that we talked about, but the plethora of these guys at kind of the fringe end of the roster are ultimately going to make it back to the practice squad. They're going to want to stay with the Ravens because this is a team that's going to win. They're going to choose to stay here, stay in the system, etc., because of opportunities because of that. So I think we overstate a little bit as fans how the risk of kind of losing some of these guys. So given that, I would keep Ferguson over some of these other guys and names that we'll talk about, like a Nigel Warrior, as an example, is a guy that, I know we're not talking about safeties or corners yet. He's a guy that I would take the chance of getting him to the practice squad, that he's not going to get claimed to keep a guy like Jalen Ferguson.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Gabe. I want to just interrupt with Jordan there because you're right. You're right about that. Maybe it's a little bit of paranoia, but at the same time, we don't know who is going to get claimed. You can't say for sure. Hey, this guy wants to be with the Ravens to win. Well, maybe he wants a chance to play and make some actual money too. So, yeah, they're all not going to get claimed. You're absolutely right, but it wouldn't. It doesn't stop my paranoia from any one of the players that any one of the guys that I like could get claimed. So I guess that's where my fear. This is my nervous Nelly type of time of year because I just don't know. League wide, of course, it's impossible to tell who has interest and who you hope your GM does. But yeah, Gabe. The inside flexibility, I wanted you to touch on as well as Ferguson, if you could, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ferguson is that guy who could potentially be moved inside and some rushing downs. Last year it was mostly Jihad Ward. I think he was kicked inside to do that kind of internal or inside rushing. In like the dime packages or in the race car packages, or as you might have it. I think Ferguson has the size more so than most of the other outside linebackers on this team. I don't think it's something that Justin Houston has really done much of in his career. I might be wrong about that, but he's really been more of an edge guy. So if there is anybody outside of McPhee, it would be Ferguson. But just to echo what Jordan said, well, I'm going to push back a little bit, but regarding Ferguson, I don't think you cut him. I think he's someone that he's been one of the more consistent performers through 2 preseason games. I know he's been out there a lot. He's been going up against some backups at times, but he's been a pretty good, consistent rusher in terms of generating pressure. I know that I think he's only had 1 sack, but he's been getting after the quarterback and pushing the pocket. And I think that's somewhere he can, give you a little bit. I think he's also a solid run defender. I'm not sure about some of the other guys the Ravens have at edge. We've seen quality things from Pernell McPhee in the past, but I liked Ferguson as someone who can come in and set the edge. And then just about, what Jordan's saying about the roster. In general, I agree with the premise. I think we probably as fans tend to overrate our guys a little bit more than other teams do. But I think this roster this season is more talented than any Ravens roster or at least like the 80-man, 90-man roster than I can remember in recent history. And a lot of that talent is on the defensive side of the ball. They've had some of these, defensive backs. I know we're going to get to them shortly, but a lot of them have popped more so than I was anticipating, and it's going to be a hard decision. I think there will be a couple of those guys, especially the ones that show the ability to play corner, that might get poached, just because corner is a premium position in the NFL, and the Ravens have shown that they're good at identifying players who can play at cornerback, and I think there will be some teams who are looking at some of these players.
Yeah, and on Ferguson, I would say that he is the most likely probably to line up with his hand in the dirt. Now, obviously, I wasn't talking about like Bowser Pepper in the A gap standing up. I'm talking about who can move inside like McPhee does, put his hand in the dirt and take on a guard. But remember last year, guys, they deactivated Ferguson for just that reason. Ward was the guy who they trusted more in that situation. So I think we'll actually lean more on the Calais Campbells of the world, the Derek Wolfs of the world, the Matabikes, and not have the inside flexibility maybe that you would expect, and just get a 4-man rush with Campbell and Matabike on the inside and 2 edge rushers on the outside. So that's my early guess at that. I'm not real confident. Jordan, you have something to say on that?
Yeah, Chris Smith is the other name that's out there. I don't think he's going to make the roster, but he fits the profile of what Jihad Ward did and what they got from him. I'm with you. I'm giving those snaps to Wolf, Campbell, and Matabike, and just keeping a defensive lineman out there for a little bit longer, or rotating 2 guys, or letting them do whatever they want to do with that. I mean, the Ravens kind of have the guys now where even if they wanted to rotate on drives and keep not rotate every 2 or 3 plays, they could keep. If they were in a nickel package, they could keep Williams and Wolf in for 1 drive, and then bring in Campbell and bring in Matabike for the next drive. I think they've got options there. I don't think Chris Smith's going to make this roster because of the roster crunch that we're talking about. But to me, those are the guys that are ultimately going to be the ones that are getting cut. I think any of these fringe talent guys that we think are going to like really meaningfully get claimed, and if we're talking about like Gino Stone, Nigel Warrior, or Darius Washington, I think those guys are the ones at real risk of being picked up by somebody else. You're going to see we already saw Jordan Richards get cut. You're going to see the Chris Smiths, the Jordan Richards, I think like Welsh is going to have a really long shot to make this roster, just because even though they need that depth at inside linebacker, they're going to want to keep the upside of those other guys. And so, guys like Crawford, I mean, I'm willing to take the bet that the Ravens he's not going to make the roster, and B, that he does not end up on another 53-man roster, because every team is going to be doing the same. Like I said, and I said this in our offensive podcast, every team is going to try to start that process of getting guys to the 53-man and then to that short-term IR. The Ravens are going to do the same. They're going to move a set of guys immediately right onto that IR or have them out right on the IR. And so you're going to be able to protect a handful of guys that go to the practice squad, but you say, hey, give it 24 hours. You're going to be on the 53. You're going to have a roster spot, kind of keep your cool.
Well, they do have to go through the waiver process, though. So, there are some of those rosters out there in the NFL that don't have as much depth as the Ravens do. I mean, we can just look at the Panthers, for instance. They wore down real quick in this last preseason game. They don't have the kind of depth along the defensive line and the secondary. They could use a couple players that the Ravens would have to put through the waiver process.
Let's make a bet. Crawford is on the Ravens practice squad to start the season. I think it's a lock.
It could happen for Crawford.
I'm confident in Crawford, but yeah, it's just the fear of the unknown. I'm glad you brought up Chris Smith, though, because he just seems like a really good fit for this system. He really does. He seems like the mini McPhee, not the same type of build, but the flexibility, the toughness, the veteran presence. Like, I really can't stand crossing his name out on my roster projections when I do it, and I do it every single time. Like, there's just no room for him. But yeah, you mentioned the linebackers, and this is where Welch. This is where the roster crunch really gets interesting, because me personally, I have to give my take right off the bat. I do not want to keep Kristen Welch on the active roster to start. He's a guy that I would like to see go to the practice squad and hope that he's one of those guys, Jordan, like you're saying. Let's just hope he gets to the practice squad. I think he will. And the reason is because these defensive backs, like Gino Stone and Darius Washington, in my opinion, are way more likely to get claimed. I mean, apparently we paid a pretty penny for Darius Washington to get him to come here in the first place, which is a lot of people say, oh, well, look at their contract. That's an indicator if you keep them. Well, same thing goes for what you have to bid on them to bring them in as an undrafted free agent. Somebody else wanted Darius Washington, probably multiple teams. So I don't want to expose him to waivers. Gino Stone showed some real promise to me, and we can't see the angles without our old trusty rusty all-22. My biggest knock on Gino Stone was that he's in a strong safety body playing free safety. But when you talk about that safety group, I just keep mentioning them over and over again because it affects how many players we can keep elsewhere. When it comes to the inside linebackers, we're relying on Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison now with L.J. Fort done for the season, it seems like. And then that third linebacker is Chris Board, a special teams stalwart. So there's not really much to say on these three guys, so I want to phrase it like this. Gabe, I'm going to start with you on this one. Can the Ravens get by on special teams with relying on Board and Harrison for that too? Can we fill around the gaps and not have to keep Welch on the active roster?
Yes, the Ravens can do that, and for two reasons. One, like you said, he's probably not going to get picked up by another team, and you can bring him up on game day if you need someone to be that kind of just a special teams guy. And I think that was a role he filled last year, and that's something that he could do potentially this year as well. He's not someone you need to keep on our 53. I don't think the Ravens should. They might, sometimes they do strange things that confuse me, but I would not want to see that happen. And then the other thing I would say is, because of the way that the Ravens use their outside linebackers, especially on third down and coverage, you don't necessarily need to have the inside linebacker depth that you might consider elsewise. So you can kind of go into like a 4-3 kind of look or a 4-2 kind of look where you have someone like Bowser or Owe or even Hayes, someone who can drop into coverage. So you have that ability from a different position as something that other teams might be dependent on their middle linebacker or their inside linebacker position to do. The Ravens have also shown in the past that they're very welcome to using a lot of dime snaps. So you're bringing a third safety into the equation, someone like, Stevens, someone like, we talked about Warrior, we talk about Gino Stone. One of those guys might be someone who can be your dime kind of linebacker in this kind of scheme. So I think that you can definitely get away with not having someone like Welch on your 53.
Yeah, you've got a lot of young stud special teams guys. I mean, the question is not can you get away with not having Welsh. I think the bigger question is can you get away with not having Levine, Welsh, and Richards. And I think there's a pretty good chance that Levine does not make the initial 53 man either. But again, these are the other thing to remember about kind of the approach is one, the spots are going to open up. So the Ravens are going to say to Levine, hey, we're going to cut you today. We're going to sign you back tomorrow because we'll have the roster spot at that point. Or even if they don't and he sits out a week, it's really unlikely that Levine is going to go find a really big role on another team in that short period of time. If the Ravens re-sign those guys after week one, they get past the week one game, their contracts become non-guaranteed. And so injuries or anything that happened down the road that it has a little bit less of a salary cap implication. So there are some benefits to rolling the dice there on a salary cap perspective for the Ravens as well. I think they can get away without those guys. I think you've seen enough from a special teams performance, from our Darius Washington and some of these other guys in the preseason. But that's going to ultimately be the big question. I think can Prochet and Duvernay, Washington and Stone show up for special team snaps when they need them to? If the Ravens like them to be able to do that, some of these veterans are going to be on the chopping block, just like Richards was.
And I'm looking at the bigger guys though, Jordan. Like Welch is one of those guys is running up the seam on kick returns, which is not where you see Anthony Averitt and the smaller guys. So like Dalen Hayes kind of strikes me as somebody that could do that, fast enough, physical enough. So I hope, the Ravens are very big on special teams, and it has paid dividends for this organization. I just hope that they don't cut a potential starter down the road to keep somebody that I consider a replacement level player like Kristen Welch because he's a very good special teamer. So yeah, use Ward. If you have to protect Harrison off the special teams unit, do it. If you have to use a guy from the outside linebacker group, do it. But it seems like we're all in agreement on this one. If there's one thing that we're pretty adamant about is just keep the 3 linebackers that we have. Don't keep 4. Some years I think we actually kept 5. I'd have to double check that. Before seemed like the magic number before the season. Now that magic number for all 3 of us is 3. So yeah, interesting group. Patrick Queen, arrow way up. Malik Harrison, arrow way up. I don't think that there needs to be a long discussion on those guys. I do think, though, if you talk about a sneaky like team leader in sacks, Patrick Queen could be it. What's the odds we see 7 sacks? Judon led the team last year with 6 sacks. I should say that. How about Patrick Queen 7 sacks this year leads a team? How crazy is that?
It's not completely crazy. If Wink decides that they want to use him that way, I think there's enough depth at outside linebacker. If I'm picking a guy, it's Justin Houston. I think ultimately he's the guy who's going to end up leading this team in sacks. That's kind of chalk, though. That's the easy answer. But Queen has the talent. It's just a question of whether or not they use him that way.
Yeah. Queen definitely has the ability to move forward as a blitzer. We've seen it already in the preseason. We saw it at times last year. I think he's definitely moving forward, or he's better moving forward than he is moving backwards at this point in his career. So I was a little worried that they wouldn't use him as much as a blitzer, or they didn't use him as much as a blitzer in his first year. I thought he was dropped into coverage too much for the skill set that he demonstrated. He should have been used as someone who was getting after the quarterback a little more frequently. But now that he might feel a little more comfortable dropping the coverage in his second season, he might not get those opportunities that he got at times last year. But I think I would say 5 to 6 sacks is definitely well within the realm of possibility. 7, it's not too much more of a stretch. If they use him a lot as a blitzer, it could happen. It could definitely happen.
Yeah, man, just pushing the envelope. Jordan, do you have something?
Yeah, the only other thing I'd say is that remember that this year's practice squad players are eligible to be on the active day roster, 4 times a year. So even if the Ravens are they're worried, they go into week 1 and their special teams is a wreck, and Welsh is on the practice squad, they can bring him up and activate him for games where they think it's more relevant. There's a lot more flexibility as these rosters come along, and I think that there's going to be more willingness for guys that would have a choice of practice squads that they want to be to stick around on this Ravens practice squad.
Yeah, one of the few blessings of COVID is the expanded practice squad and some of these loosening of the rules. So you don't have guys flying across the country and being claimed the Justin Bethels of the world. The Cyrus Jones, I guess, is a better example, going between New England and Baltimore multiple times. It just makes sense, and I think it makes for better football, the more continuity. Let them stay in the same system. I mean, why can't you have a team full of 60 guys, say, that you can just use, once you get past a certain point, they'll have their own opportunities. So it's a win-win for everybody. More players getting paid, more continuity, less moving around, better football. So yeah, man, that's a great point though, Jordan. The practice squad rules being loosened up a little bit would allow us some flexibility on that 3 linebacker group. Now,
Also,
go ahead. Go ahead.
One other name I'll throw out for special teams is Chris Westrey. He's got the size to be able to be that seam interior kickoff coverage runner. And so if he's a guy that also, I think he's also pretty close to a lock to make this roster. Maybe he finds his way to the IR once he makes the 53, but I think he'll be on, if the Ravens cut him, he will be on somebody else's 53-man roster, which means that he's likely to stay, but he could be one of those special teams guys.
Great point. As we move into the secondary, I got an idea. Hopefully you guys can follow me on this. I'm going to bring up a player, talk about him, pass him off to Jordan. Jordan, follow up on that player, bring up a new player, talk about him. Gabe, same thing, follow up on Jordan's, give me something to follow up on. So I think that's a good way to keep it moving. And the guy I want to start with, because I'm tooting my own horn, guys, I like to do that occasionally, as humble as I like to come across. I'm an egomaniac at heart, I guess. But is Brandon Stephens, when we drafted him, what did your boy Jason say about him? He is going to be Jimmy Smith Jr. We're going to see him in the Jimmy Smith role. I didn't buy into he's going to be the next free safety from year one. He's just too darn good at covering bigger receivers. So I love Brandon Stephens in this role. He gives us tremendous insurance and flexibility with Jimmy Smith on the roster. Now you have 2 guys that can basically play big corner or play in the back end, as we saw in dime defense. We saw Jimmy do that earlier in the year. So I love Brandon Stephens. I love to see him play as much as he did in that first game. And really, I think the Ravens kind of rested him against Carolina. It's like, man, we just played this kid a full game, and he showed out. Let's give him a week a week off. He showed out in practice. So I'm really excited to what Brandon Stephens, a pick that many questioned, including me, like, who is this guy? Where did he come from? Why did we pick him so early? But I see him being a really big part of this defense, Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an opportunity for him to have a role, and I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be really interesting to see with Stephens, and not to get too far ahead, but like Wade or some of these other guys, whether or not they end up on some kind of short-term IR situation when it comes out, because they're going to have a role. I think at some point in the season, the Ravens know that you need that kind of cornerback depth, and you need these guys to be able to learn the system and get a chance to do it. But I think that they're going to get their opportunities, and if he plays like he did in that preseason game, that the results are gonna be good. And that kind of reminds me of the guy that he's could potentially be knocking on the door for, which is Tavon Young. So I'll bring him up next, who we didn't see in this last preseason game. It seems like the Ravens are he's been at practice. We haven't heard a whole lot about him, even though he's been practicing and hasn't missed any practices, to my understanding. They just wanted to hold him out of the game for whatever reason. He has a guy that has been banged up, so maybe you don't want him to get that full force contact if you don't need to. But he's, to me, he's the X factor of this Ravens defense. If we get the Tavon Young, now it's been a while. it's been a while, but if we get the Tavon Young that we had in I guess that was 2018. His rookie year. If we get that Tavon Young playing nickel for this team, and Peters and Humphrey can both stay on the outside and get kind of refreshed by Smith and Averitt, this team's going to be really hard to throw on. They're going to be really, really hard to throw on. And Tavon Young is a guy that could threaten to be that interception leader of this team. He was a guy that had a nose for the football. He was breaking up passes, making interceptions. He was around the ball. And even before he got hurt in kind of fluke ways, both the other times, he was always around the ball as that kind of middle of the field roamer. He's a guy I'm going to be watching closely to see how his health works out, and if he's the guy that the Ravens signed to that big extension when they did.
Yeah, so a couple things I would like to say. First off, Stephens, is he going to be the Ravens like dime kind of, or defensive back? Is he going to be the guy who comes in and plays in that 6th defensive back role? he can play anywhere. I think, like you said, Jason, he can match up on tight ends. He can match up on larger receivers. He can play outside. He can play inside. He can play deep. He can play in the box. Love the versatility with Stevens. It's an interesting skill set to have, and I'm curious to see how he's used. I really like the pick in high. I mean, now that we've kind of seen what he can do, he did that in college, but to see him come in at the NFL level and be able to pick up, that kind of versatility is really good to see. And then real quick on Tavon Young, I think he was held out of that game because there was some concerns about the field turf at the stadium. And, he's had some knee issues, obviously. And I think they just wanted to avoid anything. There's no reason to put him out there in a situation where he might get banged up. And it is going to be interesting to see how much he's used this year. Is he going to be on a pitch count a little bit just to make sure that he can stay healthy over the course of the entire season? Or is he just going to be the Ravens like nickelback and just be out there in every single, nickel package or most nickel packages unless you go big nickel? It'll be interesting to see how his usage looks this year. And the early reps he had in preseason week 1, I thought he looked good. He looked natural. He was up there playing physical. I think he still has that ability to be a playmaker for the Ravens. I'm going to transition to a guy that I wanted to talk about because I think his name's been mentioned. It's Shaun Wade. I'm not sure if he's on the roster this year. I'm not sure if he's going to show up as someone who lands on the IR before the season starts. But I don't see him having a role on this defense based off of the other players that we've seen kind of work in front of him so far in the preseason and in training camp as well. I'm not sure that he has the polish that you want from someone who can come in and, be a reserve, either nickelback or, outside corner. The Ravens have depth at cornerback. They have depth at safety. It's hard to see where he fits in. I don't think they're going to want to cut ties with someone that they take as a rookie, who's a 5th-round pick. There's some upside there with him for sure. So I think he might be someone that they try and stash for the first year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. I just, I think we should have probably prefaced both shows with let's just hope that everybody stays healthy from now until the end of the cut so we can have these decisions to be made because it's just a really good looking group all the way around. But yeah, Shaun Wade, he would be my lock for IR candidate if they could pull that off because it just makes too much sense. You don't want to cut a guy with upside that you took in the 5th round, but at the same time, he does look like he's playing behind pretty much everybody else in that secondary who counts, who the Ravens are counting on. I don't want to say Shaun Wade don't count, but he's deep in the rotation. He had his struggles. We haven't seen him play good football in 2 years. So it's definitely something to think about. IRing him, I agree. And then another guy I wanted to talk about, and Jordan can build off of me on this, is Anthony Averitt. Wink said he's our 3rd best corner. I'm not sure if I agree with that.
Pro Bowl.
Okay, well, Jordan's going to be a good guy to follow up on this. But yeah, man, I believe in Anthony Averitt for what he's asked to do. Like when we play the Chiefs and he's on McCole Hardman, I believe that's a matchup that's in his favor. There are other receivers in the league that profile like that, your smaller receivers. If you're asking them, like in the Saints game, to cover a little Jordan Humphrey and some of these bigger receivers, that's a little bit out of his ballpark. He's improved a lot at the catch point. But as far as Anthony Averitt's competitiveness, his stickiness, I think his eyes, his vision, his timing on passes have gotten a lot better as he's going along. There was times in his rookie year where passes would sail by his head and he looked like he wasn't ready. Now he's turning, he's making a play on the ball, he's punching a little bit above his weight. So I love Anthony Averitt. I think there's a really, really high chance that we're going to lean on him in every game he's healthy in some kind of role in coverage. Jordan, I'm wondering about his trade value. I don't want to see him be traded, but he is one of the guys on this team that the Ravens could get a significant return on. Now, I'm not talking about 2 first-rounders or anything, but most of the guys we're talking about trade possibilities. Well, maybe we can get a 6th, maybe we can get a 7th. I mean, Anthony Averitt with a new contract could be worth more than we think. I'm thinking a 3rd-round pick as high as. So, he's a guy I'm really high on and somebody that I think we're gonna count on for this defense.
Yeah, no, I said Pro Bowl because that was what Wink said.
Pro
about
Bowl,
him.
okay.
I think he's a very good corner. Look, the Ravens are in an incredible cornerback depth position, right? Like overall, when you've got Peters, Humphrey, Smith, and Tavon Young sitting ahead of Anthony Averitt on the depth chart, That is what the Ravens have been trying to build for a very long time. And if you look at how they build this roster, you got Iman Marshall, 4th-round pick, already on the IR. We've got some of these other guys that we've already talked about. The Ravens are stacking cornerback depth. I think there is almost a 0% chance they trade Averitt before the start of the season. It would be absolutely devastating to trade him, to see, God forbid, some other, I won't even give names because I don't even want to put it into the universe. See 2 other cornerbacks go down to start for the Ravens, and then them need him and have traded him away for a 3rd-round pick. Great value, right? Like we'd all be happy if we traded Anthony Averitt for a 3rd-round pick, but I would be much happier rolling deeper into the playoffs because he was on this team than kind of getting that asset for him. But I think that he is the perfect guy for that 4th corner role. And he pushes well into kind of how the Ravens set all of this up. He'll be able to give people spells. Guys are going to miss games. Guys are definitely going to miss games. Jimmy Smith is definitely going to miss games. Jimmy Smith's going to miss a month at some point this year because he's getting up there in age. He always misses games. You need that depth. And that I'd spin this into a name that I just brought up earlier, which was Chris Westrey. I think he's a guy that the Ravens are going to find a way to get at least onto the initial 53 and make sure that he sticks around. He has the potential. I mean, he's huge from a physicality standpoint. He looks like he's still learning, but I think he's a great fit for this roster, a great potential to be a long-term corner project for this team. I think he's going to find his way onto this roster. And I think he's going to find his way, maybe not this year, but in the next couple of years into the rotations of what we're seeing from corners from this Baltimore Ravens team.
Yeah, I mean, I love Averitt. He's one of my favorite kind of players on this roster, just in terms of how he's advanced and made himself into a real, I think, standout. Maybe not starter, but he's a really important player. He's your go-to reserve cornerback. He's played a lot of important snaps for the Ravens, and I think, like Jordan said, is a good chance he does it again. And I would hate to see him traded. I would rather see him extended. I think he's someone that I would love to see the Ravens get on like a 3-year team-friendly deal. Jimmy Smith is getting older. We don't know what Marcus Peters is going to be in 2 years. I would love to have Averitt locked up in some kind of role. So that's something that we don't know if it's going to happen. If it's going to happen, it's probably going to happen sometime soon. But I don't know. I just think he's a great kind of person to have on your roster. Most teams can't have someone of that caliber as your 4th cornerback. And sorry for there's like a police chase going on in the background here. I don't know if you can hear it or not.
Yeah, I thought Tupac was back there. I thought it was the Illuminati, Machiavelli.
Anyway, I was going to bring up my goodness, there's literally like 7 police cars racing by. I was going to bring up Darius Washington because I think he's someone who is maybe so I brought up Shaun Wade in the last time, and I think a lot of people thought he might be the Ravens' kind of replacement for Tavon Young, future slot cornerback. I think that player might be Darius Washington. I know he played safety in college, but the Ravens have used him primarily as a slot cornerback. And he really fits that mold better than he does at safety, given his size. My goodness, I love what he's done as a slot cornerback so far in the preseason. He's been instinctual. He's been in the hip pocket of receivers. He's made plays all over the field, and I think he's someone that the Ravens really have to find a place for on this 53-man team, because he's someone who is going to help out on special teams. He can be your reserve slot cornerback, so you don't have to put Marlon Humphrey there. And I'm just super excited to see what he can do for this team.
Yeah, it slowly sunk into me that they were using Darius Washington at corner, and then it slowly sunk into me that, wait a minute, Nigel Warrior's playing corner. So that's something that they kind of hid from us. But it makes total sense. I mean, Darius, he's got the size and speed to be a slot corner, which is his 2 biggest question marks are his measurables. But you're talking about a playmaker who can make plays on the ball, Tavon style. When you're talking about, hey, he could be second on the team in interceptions. Washington has a nose for the ball. I could see that being his role in the future. If Tavon doesn't come back 100%, you have Darius. Which, and I'm looking over the list. We didn't really talk about Humphrey or Peters. I don't think we have to. Jimmy Smith we touched on. We really don't have to. That leaves basically our Gino Stone. That's the one guy we haven't talked about. And to me, what I was getting at is with Washington playing a lot of corner, with Warrior out of the picture at safety, it seems to point that Gino Stone has a role on this team. He might be that dime safety if they don't trust Stevens in that role. And being dime safety, I mean in the back end of dime defense. If they don't have that trust Stevens in that role, or they want to match Stevens up a corner for that game, like it seems like Gino Stone has quietly carved out a role on this team as the free safety. You know, almost a I don't know. I almost want to say as a lock. You know, if you look around, you say, "Hey, we play dime. We want Deshaun roaming around. We want Chuck in the box. Who's that guy on the back end?" Well, if you want to save Jimmy a little bit and you don't trust the other rookie, you have Geno Stone there. So could you guys both just take your time and speak on Stone?
I mean, I loved Stone was a guy that popped off the tape when I was watching Ipanisa from Iowa a couple of years ago when we were looking at some of those edge defenders. So I'm a big fan of his. I think it's interesting because, and this kind of goes back to the whole conversation about practice squad guys from last year having opportunity to be poached all the way through the season last year, and even kind of as we get into the start of this season. Like Gino Stone was a free agent until 8 weeks ago. The Ravens signed him to a veteran minimum contract that's not guaranteed. So I do agree that I think he's a great fit for that role. I think he's a great player to have. I think that there's a chance that Gino Stone and Anthony Levine don't make the starting 53-man roster and particularly for Stone, because his contract is not guaranteed at this point. So they can let him go. There are no kind of salary implications that come with that. And if nobody else picks him up, which nobody was willing to do 12 weeks ago. So has he put so much on tape that someone's going to say they're going to sign him now when they weren't going to do that before then? I don't think he's changed a lot from an evaluation or a player standpoint between now and then, except for the teams that maybe have seen him in practice. So these joint practices, with the Panthers, maybe if they need a safety, I don't know. I think that leaves him at some risk of not being on the initial 53, but I think he will be on the week 1 roster come one way or the other.
So a little bit of a fact check, Jordan. They actually signed Gino Stone back in March, so he wasn't available 12 weeks ago. But your point does stand. He was on the practice squad last year. I think he had struggles last year. He did not look comfortable in the defense. It took him a while, I think, to kind of find his role and feel comfortable in the NFL for that matter. I think he now looks like he's comfortable. I think the Ravens trust him. I think he's the most natural kind of reserve free safety that they have on the roster right now. And they've clearly put him in that position so far in the preseason. And, he's shown some of the things that we liked about him when we watched him in college. He has that instinctual ability to be in the right place. He has that playmaking ability to come down with the football. He has the ball skills. We saw him last week. He didn't have the interceptions last week, but he was there to make a nice pass break up on a deep shot down the sidelines. I think he's someone that I don't know if I can fully trust him, but I think he's shown enough that I can trust him to be kind of that guy who comes in. If you want Clark and or Elliott somewhere closer to the line of scrimmage, he's someone I can trust on the back end. That I'm not sure, aside from Elliott, there's anybody else on the team that I really trust in that role. I don't think Clark is really meant to be the single high guy. I haven't seen it from Warrior necessarily, and Stevens I haven't really seen it from either. So I think that's a position that the Ravens have been looking for, and Stone doesn't have necessarily the size speed combination of some of the elite free safeties in the NFL, but I think he makes up for it a little bit with what he can do in terms of bringing the instinctual part of the game.
Very, very well said. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah. I also think that some of these signings, there are going to be some cuts and signings from the Ravens, right? So it would be potentially advantageous for the Ravens to cut Stone because he's non-guaranteed now and tell him there's going to be a roster spot opening up for you tomorrow. We're going to sign you for more and we're going to guarantee you the deal. If you tell us that wink, wink, when we make this decision that we'll turn around and bring you right back, I don't see him at risk of kind of being ultimately scooped up. And that's not a waiver issue. I believe it's just an outright cut issue. Since he's already under contract. So I don't know quite what the way those rules break down, but I think there are going to be some wink like deals with guys like Levine or guys like Stone or some of these guys that are somewhere around the fringes that might ultimately end up being cut but turned around and brought right back.
Stone will be exposed to waivers. He doesn't have enough experience in the NFL to be released as a free agent. So
Okay.
that would be a risk there. Like unlike Levine, who would be just available to sign with whoever he wanted to.
What are the rules? So it's 4 years to become a free agent?
I think it's 3 years.
Okay.
It's four.
Vested.
I thought it was 4, but like
Might be
what
4.
qualifies as a year is a mystery to me. So
That's true.
it's like every year, especially with the handshake agreements, this is the reason I don't know the rules. It's because the rules are there ain't no rules. I forget what movie that's from, but the rules are there ain't no rules. I think that's Grease. Reference there. Okay, so yeah, man, like the handshake agreements. The hey, you wait a day, we give you a raise. The hey, Anthony Levine, you've been in town 11 years. You really want to move your family. Hey, why don't you just come back? You know we're planning for the future. Okay, Ravens, you've made my life complete. Like we don't know all this stuff. So I try to just be patient when those first round of cuts come out and just don't flip out on Twitter. Just relax for a second because the roster is going to look different by opening day. But guys, we've covered a lot of ground. I have 50 some minutes on my counter, so we're gonna wrap up here. But is there any? I'll just say, if you guys could take a minute or two, any concerns? Let's flip it because there's been a lot of positive today. Jordan, if you want to go ahead, or if you want to mute yourself, whatever you think, right there, buddy.
Yeah, the dog has some thoughts. But to me, the big question revolves, around where and who they're keeping in the secondary. I think that there are ultimately, to me, other than a big injury to a major player kind of biting this team in the ankle, there just aren't concerns about this defense. Gabe and I have talked about on our podcast them being a top 3 to 5 defense this upcoming year. None of that has changed up to this point of the year. How many guys do you keep between corner and safety to start this year, right? Like you keep 7 corners and 6 safeties in this first go around of the 53-man roster. If we're talking about putting weight on the IR outright to start, but you're still trying to talk about keeping Stone, Levine, Washington, Stevens, Westrey, and then all the starters in front of that, that's a lot of guys. And so to me, this is the spot where legitimate concern about somebody getting claimed on waivers, somebody getting signed if they're outright cut, whatever that situation comes down, this is the spot where the secondary is where I'm looking the most clearly, because the Ravens have built a ton of depth there, and I think that there are some quality guys that are really going to be at some risk this year.
Yeah, and I think if there is a concern for me, it's the inside linebacker position, the depth of that position. If there was an injury there, I think then you're looking at Chris Board as a starter, and that's not something that I'm too happy about. Not that I don't like Chris Board, but I think he's kind of someone who is more of a core special teamer who can come in and play in a pinch. He hasn't done too much for me in terms of being a starting caliber a linebacker in this league. So that to me would be my biggest concern. We have seen some significant progress, in my opinion, from Patrick Queen. Malik Harrison I thought was kind of a known quantity, and he looks even better than what I expected out of him. So I think those two will definitely handle the bulk of the responsibilities. But if one of them were to have to miss some time, that's when the question marks start coming in. Do you look at someone like one of the safeties you play predominantly dime or a big nickel as kind of your base package? That might be the direction you go instead of putting Board out there. But this is just a really, really deep unit. I think Wink Martindale is one of the best defensive minds in the NFL. Real quick, there've been a lot of praise for Brandon Staley and the Rams did last year, and they were a great defense. And I think it's a really interesting kind of scheme that they have. It's not exactly what the Ravens do. In fact, the Ravens do something quite different a lot of the time. But I think the Ravens are the kind of that overlooked defense that people aren't talking about in this offseason. And one thing that's really interesting about them is they've been so incredibly consistent. And one of the talking points you'll hear is that defense isn't sticky from year to year. The Ravens defense has been sticky for year to year over the past, I think, half decade. Dating back to, 2015 was kind of an abomination. But if you look back all the way to 2013, they've been one of the best defenses in the NFL since, Dean Pease took over, and then we had the transition to Wink Martindale. It's been consistently top 10 defense in pretty much every metric you look at, whether it's DVOA, whether it's, points allowed, yards allowed, third down. They haven't always been there in the sacks, but pretty much every other metric, they've been among the top teams. And that's something that I think is going to continue in this season as well. They have one of the deepest defensive rosters in the NFL, and I think it's going to show over the course of the season.
Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to check out Gabe and Jordan on Twitter. Their Twitter handles and links will be below. Most importantly, listen to their podcast, The Situation Room, filmstudybaltimore.com. All of that will be down there. Hopefully, hey, maybe I'll get invited on their show one of these days. We don't know. I mean, they're pretty busy guys, man. But no, in all seriousness, man, Jordan and Gabe, man, one of the first people that supported me when I came out. So that's why I feel so comfortable messing with them all the time. And, two very smart guys. A lot of the smart guys I know, honestly, don't know much about football. These are two smart guys who actually are just as smart about football. And when I disagree with them, I can pick on them like a real person, which is just awesome. I mean, it's just like, it's like I've known these guys forever. So it's awesome. Can't thank you enough. Thank you to football family for watching. And we'll see you guys again next time. Say goodbye to the people.
Thanks for having us on, Jason.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Looking forward to doing it next time. And we will have you on one of these times.
Yeah, do it, man. I'll stay quiet. I'll mind my manners. All right, guys. Have a good night.